I came to the countryside for a fresh start, ready to judge its authenticity from my city-polished perspective. Turns out, the man whose disgusting boots I mocked was about to become my new landlord. The move to the countryside was supposed to be my reset button. I'd spent 10 years climbing the corporate ladder in the city, and all I had to show for it was a serious caffeine addiction, an ulcer, and a corner office with a view of other corner offices. So, I cashed in some stocks, found a charming little cottage for rent in a town called Meadow Creek, and traded my power suits for linen pants. The plan was simple: fresh air, a farmer's market lifestyle, and maybe, just maybe, I'd finally finish writing that novel. The cottage was perfect. It was a little 2-bedroom place with a wraparound porch and a garden full of wildflowers, owned by a sweet old woman named Mrs. Gable. She was selling the place, but her realtor assured me the new owner would be happy to continue my lease. "They're looking for a quiet, long-term tenant," the realtor had said, winking. "You're a perfect fit." I'd felt a surge of pride. Of course I was. I was quiet. I paid my rent on time, and I wasn't about to throw any wild parties. I was the dream tenant. My first Saturday in Meadow Creek, I decided to fully embrace my new life. I put on a flowy sundress, grabbed my wicker basket, and headed to the town's farmer's market. It was everything I'd imagined. Stalls overflowed with heirloom tomatoes and artisanal cheeses. The air smelled of fresh basil and kettle corn. I was in rustic heaven. I was happily selecting a bundle of rainbow chard when I noticed them. The boots. They were attached to a tall, broad-shouldered man standing at the stall next to me, talking to the vendor about soil acidity. But the boots, they were an abomination. They were thick, heavy leather, scuffed beyond recognition, and caked in what looked like a century of mud and manure. A thick layer of reddish-brown dirt clung to every seam, and the laces were frayed and stained. They were an offense to the otherwise charming, curated rusticity of the market. They were real. Too real. I subtly pulled out my phone and angled it to snap a picture, intending to send it to my friend Chloe back in the city with the caption, "They really lean into the farmer part of farmer's market here." But then I decided to just call her. It was more dramatic. "Chloe, you will not believe this place," I whispered, turning my back to the man. "It's adorable, but the local flavor is a little pungent." I watched as he picked up a potato, his hands as weathered and earthy as his boots. "I'm looking at a pair of shoes right now that I'm pretty sure have been stomped through every barnyard in the state. I mean, a little effort wouldn't kill these people, you know. It's a public space." I laughed a little too loudly, trying to project an air of sophisticated amusement. "Seriously, I think the mud on his boots has its own ecosystem. It's disgusting." A deep, calm voice spoke from directly behind me. "Those boots have paid for the food on my table for 20 years. They've walked the fields that grew the potato in my hand, and they've helped me build a life I'm proud of." My blood ran cold. I spun around. The farmer was standing there, no longer talking to the vendor. He was looking directly at me. He wasn't angry. His expression was one of mild disappointment, which somehow felt infinitely worse. He was handsome, in a rugged, sun-beaten way, with kind eyes that were currently looking at me as if I were a spoiled child. I felt my face flush with a heat that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I was just talking to my friend," I stammered, my carefully constructed world of quaint, pastoral bliss crumbling around me. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I know. I heard." He looked down at his boots, then back up at me. "Some folks see dirt. I see honest work." He paid for his vegetables, gave the vendor a polite nod, and walked away, his heavy, mud-caked boots leaving faint, dusty imprints on the clean pavement. I stood there, mortified and furious at him for embarrassing me, and furious at myself for getting caught. I abandoned my shopping, stomped back to my pristine SUV, and sped home, the humiliation churning in my stomach. The nerve of that man, calling me out like that. Who did he think he was? Back in the safety of my perfect cottage, I tried to shake it off. I poured a large glass of Chardonnay and sat on my porch swing, forcing myself to admire the wildflowers. This was a minor hiccup, a clash of cultures. He was just some backwoods farmer who didn't understand city humor. By evening, I had mostly convinced myself that I was the wronged party. I was just settling in with my laptop to work on my novel when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I padded to the door, peering through the peephole. I couldn't see a face, just a broad chest and a simple blue work shirt. Probably a neighbor with a welcome to the neighborhood pie, I thought, smiling to myself. The quaintness was back on track. I swung the door open, my practiced friendly smile already in place. "Hello." The smile froze and then melted off my face. Standing on my porch was the farmer from the market, the man with the boots. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't smiling. He just looked at me with those same calm, assessing eyes. My mind raced. Was he here to confront me again? Had he followed me home? "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze unwavering. "I believe so," he said, his voice as deep and steady as it had been at the market. He gestured vaguely toward the cottage. "I'm the new owner. Mrs. Gable finalized the sale with me this morning. I just wanted to come by, introduce myself as your new landlord, and make sure the porch was sturdy enough for these old boots." My eyes involuntarily shot downwards, to his feet, and there they were, planted firmly on my welcome mat, the same battered, mud-caked, manure-stained leather boots. My brain went into a state of catastrophic system failure. The words "new landlord" echoed in the cavernous space where my confidence used to be. Every snide, superior comment I'd made on the phone to Chloe played back in my head on a horrifying loop. The local flavor is a little pungent. A little effort wouldn't kill these people. The mud on his boots has its own ecosystem. It's disgusting. I felt the blood drain from my face, and I'm sure I looked as ghostly as I felt. I could only stare at him, my mouth slightly agape, my brilliant novel and farmer's market fantasies turning to ash. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just waited, his expression unreadable, letting the full weight of the situation settle on me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. A cricket chirped somewhere in the wildflowers, sounding like an alarm bell for my own stupidity. I am so sorry," I finally managed to croak out, the words feeling thin and pathetic. "About what I said at the market. That was inexcusable. It was a bad joke. I wasn't thinking." He raised an eyebrow, a tiny movement that conveyed a universe of doubt. "A joke." He said the word flatly, not as a question, but as a statement he was examining from all sides, like a strange rock he'd found in a field. "Funny." He shifted his weight and the leather of his boots creaked. The sound made me flinch. "Well," he continued, his tone shifting to one of brisk business, effectively dismissing my feeble apology. "Like I said, I'm the owner now. My name is Marcus Thorne." He didn't offer a hand to shake, and I was grateful. I wasn't sure my own hand would have stopped trembling. "I have a copy of your lease agreement from Mrs. Gable. I just wanted to confirm you're aware of all the terms you signed." He was all business. It was colder somehow than if he had yelled at me. He was treating me not as a person who had insulted him, but as a line item, a tenant, a responsibility. He was asserting his power quietly, professionally, and it was devastating. "Yes, of course," I said, trying to regain some composure. "I read it all. I'm a very quiet tenant. I always pay on time." I sounded like I was pleading. "Good," he said, his eyes leaving my face to scan the porch, the railings, the hanging ferns I'd so carefully selected. His gaze was sharp, critical. It felt like he was seeing every crack in the paint, every weed I'd missed in the flower beds. He was seeing the property not as a charming backdrop for my new life, but as an asset, an investment. "The lease is pretty standard. No major alterations without written permission. You're responsible for the garden beds in the front, and basic upkeep, of course." His eyes drifted upward, following the line of a drain pipe to the edge of the roof. I followed his gaze. The gutters were choked with a thick layer of brown leaves and debris from last fall. I'd noticed them vaguely, but had filed it under charming rustic feature. "Section 7, subsection C," he said, his voice still perfectly level. "Tenant is responsible for keeping gutters and drains free of debris to prevent water damage." My stomach clenched. I knew nothing about gutters. In my old high-rise apartment, problems like that were solved by a simple phone call to a faceless building manager. "Right, yes, I was Planning on getting to that, I lied, my voice sounding unconvincing even to my own ears. He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the clogged gutter. Good. You wouldn't want rot setting into the eaves. This old house has good bones, but you have to respect it. You let the little things go, and the whole structure suffers. It felt like he was talking about more than just the house. That clay soil around here, the same stuff that grows my potatoes, it's heavy. When it washes down into those gutters and mixes with the leaves, it turns into concrete. You have to clear it out before it causes real damage. He finally looked back at me, his calm brown eyes pinning me in place. I'm going to be working on the property line out back tomorrow, mending a fence. I'll be here most of the day. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. He wasn't offering to help. He was setting a deadline. An unspoken expectation had been established. He took a single step back off the porch. I expect a tenant who takes care of my property, he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its businesslike edge and gaining a hard, personal undertone. Inside and out. He turned without another word and walked down the stone path toward a dusty, well-used pickup truck parked on the road, a truck I hadn't even noticed. He didn't look back. I stood there, frozen on my perfect porch, staring at the overflowing gutters. The humiliation from the market was nothing compared to this. This was a cold, creeping dread. He hadn't just overheard my mockery. He had assigned me a penance. He was going to make me get my hands dirty. I looked at my own hands, manicured and soft, completely useless for a task like this. I didn't own a ladder. I didn't own gloves. And my new landlord, the man I had called disgusting, was going to be watching me tomorrow to see if I would fail. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the scene on the porch, his calm voice reciting the terms of my lease like a judge, handing down a sentence. Section 7, subsection C. The words were burned into my brain. I tossed and turned, the image of those clogged gutters looming in my mind like a monstrous final exam I hadn't studied for. My charming country cottage suddenly felt like a prison, and Marcus Thorne was the warden. The next morning I was up at sunrise, driven by a potent cocktail of fear and caffeine. I spent the first hour on my laptop frantically Googling how to clean gutters. The videos showed cheerful, capable men in flannel shirts effortlessly scooping out dry leaves with specialized tools. My reality was starkly different. I had no ladder, no tools, and no flannel. My first attempt involved a wobbly kitchen stool and a garden trowel. I managed to reach a tiny section of the gutter, from which I dislodged a slimy, compacted clump of what looked like primordial ooze. It fell with a wet smack onto the pristine white porch railing, leaving a dark, slug-like trail. I nearly gagged. This was not going to work. Defeated, I drove into Meadow Creek's small town center in search of a hardware store. The place was a relic from another era, smelling of sawdust and oil, with an old man behind the counter who looked like he'd been there since the store opened. "Need to clear out some gutters," I announced, trying to sound like a person who did this sort of thing all the time. He looked me up and down, taking in my yoga pants and pristine sneakers. "First time?" he asked, a knowing twinkle in his eye. He set me up with an extendable ladder that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, a pair of thick work gloves, and a long-handled gutter scoop. "Careful on that ladder, miss," he warned as I swiped my credit card. "She can be tricky if you don't find your balance." Back at the cottage, I wrestled the aluminum beast out of my SUV and stared up at the roofline. It looked twice as high as it had yesterday. My heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I could hear the distant rhythmic thud of a hammer Marcus, mending his fence. He was out there, waiting, watching. Setting up the ladder was a clumsy, clattering ordeal. It scraped against the side of the house, and I was sure he could hear every fumbling move I made. Finally, with the ladder leaning precariously against the roof, I took a deep breath and started to climb. The rungs felt slick and narrow under my new sneakers. The ladder wobbled with every upward step. I kept my eyes glued to the gutter, refusing to look down, refusing to look toward the back of the property where I knew he was working. The contents of the gutter were even more disgusting up close. It was a solid, damp, heavy mass of rotting leaves, dirt, pine needles, and unidentifiable black sludge. The smell was earthy and foul. I scraped at it with the scoop, my arms already aching. The clay soil he'd mentioned had turned the debris into a heavy, cement-like paste. Small bits rained down on my hair and face. I shuddered with revulsion but kept scooping, driven by the image of his disappointed face. I worked for what felt like hours, moving the ladder section by section, my muscles screaming in protest. I was covered in sweat and grime. A smear of black sludge streaked across my cheek. My expensive athletic wear was ruined. This was my personal, rustic hell. Finally, I reached the last section, directly over the front porch. It was the most clogged section of all, a dense dam of debris that had caused a dark water stain to form on the fascia board. I dug the scoop in with a grunt, trying to break it free. That's when it happened. I lost my footing. Maybe the ladder shifted. Maybe my foot slipped on a wet rung. I don't know. 1 second I was straining against the muck. The next, the world tilted sideways. A strangled scream escaped my lips as I flailed, my hands scrabbling for a hold. The gutter scoop clattered onto the porch roof. I fell backwards. Time slowed down. I saw a flash of green leaves, blue sky, and then the hard, unforgiving ground rushing up to meet me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the snap of bone, for the searing pain. But the impact never came. Instead, I landed against something solid and warm. Strong arms wrapped around me, breaking my fall and absorbing the shock with a grunt of effort. My head lolled back against a hard shoulder. The scent of sun, sawdust, and clean earth filled my senses. I cracked open my eyes and found myself staring up into the concerned face of Marcus Thorne. He was breathing heavily, his jaw tight. He had me cradled in his arms like I weighed nothing. His work shirt was dusty, his hands calloused, but his grip was steady and secure. For a moment, we just stayed there, my heart hammering against his chest, the world silent except for our breathing. The mortification was so complete, so absolute, that it circled back around to a strange, numb calm. "You're supposed to have someone hold the base of the ladder," he said, his voice a low rumble right next to my ear. "Section 12. General safety." He set me down on my feet, but I was so shaken my knees buckled. He kept a steadying hand on my arm to keep me from collapsing. I couldn't look at him. I stared at his boots, planted firmly on the grass. The very boots I had mocked. They were covered in fresh dirt and bits of grass, evidence of the work he'd been doing all morning while I played house. He had seen me struggling. He must have been walking over to check on me when I fell. "Thank you," I whispered to his boots. He was silent for a long moment. I finally risked a glance up at his face. He wasn't looking at me with anger or disappointment anymore. He was looking at the streak of gutter sludge on my cheek. Without thinking, he raised his thumb and gently, almost tenderly, wiped the filth from my skin. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, a strange current of warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. His thumb came away dirty. He looked at it, then back at me, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He dropped his hand. "Go inside and get cleaned up," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll finish this." I stumbled inside, my body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and shame. I leaned against the closed door, my heart still thudding a frantic rhythm. He was finishing the gutters. He had saved me from a serious injury, possibly worse, and was now completing the task he had essentially shamed me into starting. The complexity of it all was dizzying. He was my landlord, my antagonist, and now my reluctant rescuer. I took the longest shower of my life, scrubbing away the grime and trying to wash away the humiliation. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel, I could hear the scrape of the ladder being moved outside. I peeked through the blinds. Marcus was on the roof now, not even bothering with the ladder for the porch section. He moved with an easy, practiced confidence, scooping the last of the debris into a bucket, with none of the clumsy struggle I'd endured. He was competent, capable, everything I wasn't. By the time he was done, I had managed to pull on a pair of jeans and a clean t-shirt. I made 2 tall glasses of iced tea and carried them out to the porch just as he was rinsing his hands with the garden hose. He looked up, surprised, as I approached. I made you this," I said, holding out a glass. "It's the least I can do. Thank you. For everything." He hesitated for a moment, then took the glass, his calloused fingers brushing against mine. "You're welcome," he said, taking a long drink. The silence between us was different now. The sharp edge of tension had been replaced by a sort of awkward awareness. "I'm really sorry," I said, looking down at my own glass, "for what I said at the market. There's no excuse for it. I was being a snob, a judgmental city person trying to feel superior. It was ugly, and I'm embarrassed." He leaned against the porch railing, the one I'd splattered with muck earlier, which was now completely clean. He looked out over the wildflower garden. "Meadow Creek is a small town," he said, not unkindly. "We tend to judge people by what they do, not by what they wear. Those boots. My father gave them to me when I took over the farm. He wore them for 10 years before I did." He looked down at them, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "They've walked every inch of my land. They've kicked stones out of the soil and stood in the mud to pull a newborn calf out of its mother. They're a part of my story." I felt a fresh wave of shame, but this time it was different. It was the shame of understanding. "I get it now," I whispered. "I see honest work." I used his own words, and he glanced at me, a glimmer of surprise in his expression. He finished his tea and set the empty glass on the railing. "Well, the gutters are clear," he said, his tone shifting back towards something neutral. "Just try to keep an eye on them, especially after a storm." "I will," I promised. "And Marcus, I'd like to pay you for your time, for finishing the job." He shook his head immediately. "No, just be a good tenant. Respect the property. That's payment enough." He started to walk away, his workday seemingly done. "Wait," I called out, a sudden impulse taking over. "You said you judge people by what they do." He stopped and turned, waiting. "Then let me do something," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. "Let me help you with that fence tomorrow. Or anything. I want to learn. I moved out here to have a different life, but I've just been playing a part. I don't know the first thing about honest work, but I'd like to." He studied my face for a long, silent moment. I was sure he was going to laugh, to tell me to go back to my novel and my Chardonnay. I held his gaze, trying to pour every ounce of sincerity I felt into my expression. I wanted him to see that this wasn't just about making amends for my comment. It was about making amends with myself. Finally, a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features and making his kind eyes crinkle at the corners. It was the first time I'd seen him truly smile, and it was breathtaking. "All right," he said, the smile still in his voice. "Be at the back fence line tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "And wear sturdy shoes. It's no place for sneakers." The next morning, I was there at 6:55, wearing a brand new, very stiff pair of work boots I'd bought from the old man at the hardware store. Marcus handed me a pair of leather gloves and showed me how to stretch the wire, how to hammer in the fence staples without bending them. It was hard, grueling work. My muscles ached in places I didn't know I had, but as the sun climbed higher, we fell into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side. He told me about his farm, about the challenges of modern agriculture, about his family's history on that land. I told him about my soulless corporate job, about my dream of being a writer. We didn't just mend a fence that day. We started building a bridge. In the days and weeks that followed, my country reset finally began for real. It wasn't about linen pants and farmers' market aesthetics. It was about calloused hands, the satisfaction of a hard day's work, and the unexpected friendship with the man I had so horribly misjudged. And every time I saw his muddy boots on my porch, I didn't see dirt. I saw character. I saw strength. And I saw the man who had, against all odds, become my home.